Good evening, everybody. This is Gerudo King. I am going to be doing something a little different today, and hopefully for a few days. This is a reading of the book novelization, really, of the Battlestar Galactica miniseries as was released in 2003. Of course, a little bit of an explanation is due as to why I'm reading this. I know a couple of people will probably be like, "Oh man, this has nothing to do with the Bible," or because that's what my channel is known for. For anyone else who happens to find Battlestar Galactica and looks at this, um, so I'm gonna briefly give a summary of my description, which you can also just read it and skip to the reading. I will have chapter uh, discussions, chap or not discussions, but chapter links in the description as well. So if you want to skip to chapter 3 or chapter 4 or whatever, you'll be able to do that. Um, so this is a novelization of Battlestar Galactica, the miniseries. This was released in 2003. The miniseries was made by a guy named Ronald D. He wanted to reimagine. He saw a lot of really great concepts in the original Battlestar Galactica, which came out in 1978. Um, but he also saw a lot of weaknesses, and he wanted to perfect that story to some degree, especially with the modern technology that we have now. Uh, so this story talks about Paul's Evangel at its core. I mean, there's a lot of different themes it just shows, so there's a lot of things they touch on. Um, But the greatest aspect of this show is undoubtedly that Paul's evangel of justification, conciliation, and God's sovereignty, as presented in Romans, is found prominently in the least deserving character, which represents the ecclesia in the story. Um, this is a wonderful, wonderful story in that regard, and does directly tie into the themes that I'm talking about on more analytical and the unsearchable riches videos or over on Seth or Catherine's channel. Uh, as such, this is probably the best story for any of us in Christ to witness today. Outside of, of course, like the actual Bible. If you want a great fiction work that will feed your spiritual craving, but you don't want to sit there and read a Bible, or you don't want to sit there and do something like really taxing, this story is one of the best. It is so good, in fact, that my angelfish, Amaris, the Celestial, has has put it like this. She does not watch TV. She does not like watching TV. She usually finds it to be a waste of time, which I disagree with. I think it can be very valuable, but she just doesn't take to it the way that a lot of others do. However, she absolutely loved this show, and she could not stop watching it because it tapped into her spiritual conscience, I guess, if you want to put it in a kind of mystical way. It really hit her, and to this day, she'll still say, "Man, I wish I could just watch that all over again." Uh, as if she had never seen it before. So it is with that in mind that I desire to show this off. As such, I hope you enjoy. I'm going to try to uh, keep my commentary to a minimum. I want this to be far more atmospheric. I'm just kind of going to read until I get bored or until my throat starts hurting. I'll take a second or two in between chapters, and if there's some thought between chapters, I'll talk about it, and I'll also put those breaks in the description as well. So you will have timestamps pretty much all the way through, so you don't have to listen to all of me yapping the way you are now. Okay, without further ado, this is Battlestar Galactica. This is written by a man named Jeffrey Carver. He was asked by Ronald D. to create an adaptation um of it in writing. And since he has made it free to all on his website, I feel confident reading this without feeling like there will be some kind of copyright strike. If that happens, of course, I'll just stop. Okay, Battlestar Galactica, the prologue. Cylons were created by man, created to make life easier on the 12 colonies. It began as simple robots, toys for the amusement of the wealthy and the young, but it was not long before they became useful, and then indispensable workers. As their sophistication grew, the Cylons were used for the difficult and dangerous work that humans preferred to avoid: mining, heavy industry, deep space construction, and finally, perhaps inevitably, they were used for war, not against enemies from without, but by human against human, as the 12 colonies found reason to wage war against one another. The Cylons were the greatest soldiers in the history of warfare. They were smart, fast, and deadly. Successive models had become increasingly independent, capable of making decisions without human orders, and they were utterly without conscience. Killing, to the Cylons, was simply one of the functions for which they had been superbly designed. In hindsight, perhaps it should not have been a surprise that the day would come when the Cylons decided to kill their masters. And when that day came, the horror of war was unleashed upon all 12 of the colonies of man. For 10 long and bloody years, humanity fought, not just for freedom, but for survival. The 12 colonies, facing a common, implacable foe, at last came together and joined as one. Many fought, and many died in the effort to destroy the mechanized race that humanity itself had conceived and brought into being. There would be no victory, but though or through valiant fighting and with the mobilization of every available resource throughout the human sphere, the Cylons were gradually driven from the immediate part of space occupied by humanity. In the end, an armistice was declared. Humanity would live in peace, while the Cylons left to find another world to call their own. Live and let live was the philosophy, if live was a term that could be applied to the existence of these robots. No one knew the location of the Cylon world, but to maintain the peace, a remote space station was built in the dark emptiness between the stars to be a place where Cylon and human would meet and maintain diplomatic relations. Once a year, every year, the colonials sent an officer for the scheduled meeting. After the first year, the Cylons sent no one. No one has seen or heard from the Cylons in over 40 years. But that was about to change. Part 1. It begins. Chapter 1. On the Armistice Station. The diplomatic spaceship emerged from its jump with a momentary flash of light. Its prior inertia carried it like a boat on a river toward its destination. The only propulsion required was braking thrust. The spidery space station hung silent in the darkness, billions of miles from the nearest inhabited world. A row of navigational marker lights winked along its vertical spine, barely illuminating its outline. The approaching spaceship, an ungainly white transport, pierced the darkness with tiny flares of its maneuvering jets as it slowed. Nearing the docking section, it rotated and pitched upward to align itself with the station. Practice made the intricate ballet of the docking maneuver seem casual. The pilots had performed it so many times, it was an automatic movement, like a hand slipping into a glove. The thrusters brought the ship to a halt, 100 meters from the station. The telescoping passageway emerged from the side of the station's docking port and stretched out, crossing the gap with a single gliding movement. It drew up into place against the ship's airlock, and with a series of thunks, the magnetic locks, made it fast. Another scheduled meeting was about to begin, in theory. The intercom crackled to life, and the pilot's voice filled the departure lock. Colonel Wakefield, we are docked. You may enter the Armistice Station at your discretion. If you need anything, we'll be here. I hope you don't get too lonely over there. The colonel pressed the talk button on the intercom. Don't worry about me, Captain. I'm used to it by now. I'll be back soon enough, no doubt, but nothing to show for it. With the sigh of someone who had done this job many times already, he drew himself up straight and stepped into the airlock hatch. The latch mechanism stuck for a moment, then swung open, revealing the interior of the passageway. Picking up his briefcase, the colonel stepped across the threshold and began the long, deliberate walk down the passageway and into the station's interior. There was an unavoidable grimness to this job, but he vowed not to give in to a sense of futility. If the Cylons did not show up, and he fully expected that they would not, he would not let that reflect on his own performance. His footsteps echoed in the silence of the station as he left the passageway and airlock and passed through the long corridor leading to the meeting chamber. He shivered a little and wrinkled his nose at the musty smell of the place. There was dust in the air. The filters must be in need of replacement, and a patina of grime everywhere. Maintenance robots must be breaking down, he thought. They were Cylon built machines, of course. Humans no longer had robots. But really, the wonder was that they still functioned at all. He doubted they had been serviced since the station was built. What did that say about the endurance of the Cylon technology? The thought caused him a little shudder, which he did not allow to the surface. Only once a year was there any official activity in the station, and that activity consisted of the colonel arriving, waiting 3 days for his Cylon counterpart to show up, and then leaving. Not once in the last 39 years had a Cylon representative appeared to meet with him or with any other member of the colonial delegation. The colonel often wondered why they had bothered. He knew the reason. Even if the Cylons did not honor their commitment to the armistice terms, at least the colonials were keeping up their end of the argument or the agreement. And how else could they maintain vigilance since they did not even know in what direction to look for the Cylon world, if it even really existed? The colonel came to the massive closed doors of the meeting chamber and pulled them open. The sound reverberated in the room as the doors slammed closed behind him. He strode forward, heels clicking on the broad tiled deck. The chamber was itself practically a hallway, long, widening slightly toward the center, with outward canted walls and steel support beams arcing low across the room in closely spaced rows. It was a spare space, devoid of decoration or color, lit along the edges of the floor by widely spaced ceiling lights. Its very shape seemed to suggest a meeting of adversaries, long to permit ample time to view the approaching opposite, and barren as if to deny any possibility of emotion or warmth. A narrow table stretched most of the way across the center of the room, a single chair on either side. The colonial flag hung at rest on its pole at the left end of the table. There was no flag for the Cylons. The colonel sat down in the chair and snapped open his briefcase. With efficient care, he removed two framed photos from the briefcase, one of his son and one of his wife, and placed them at his left hand on the table. He gazed at them for a moment, allowing himself the reminder of home, of what he was here to protect, before firmly assuming again an attitude of detachment. Then he took out a sheaf of papers and began leafing through them, briefing documents on the Cylons as they had last been seen 40 years ago. He knew these documents by heart, but he reviewed them nevertheless, with the steady weariness of someone who has done the same thing over and over, year after year, for a very long time. Nothing had changed, he thought, except him. A year older, a year closer to retirement, a year wearier of this charade. Cylons would never come. For all he knew, and for all anyone knew, they were extinct. Maybe they had turned on each other and annihilated their entire mechanical civilization. Wouldn't that be justice? Or maybe they had set off across the galaxy in search of new realms to conquer. But how would the colonials ever know? I mean, when the robots departed the star system 40 years ago, they hadn't left the forwarding address. Colonel sighed and closed his eyes, resting his head against the seat back. It was silent here, but he was used to the silence. It was restful in a way. Later, when the wait got to be too long, he would catch up on some reading or return to the transport ship for rest and relaxation. But for now, he would just sit here as a representative of his worlds and soak in the solitude. It wasn't long before he caught himself nodding off, and he drew himself up with a deep breath. It wouldn't do to nap. He was on watch, even if he was here as a diplomat, and even if he passed the 3 days alone. He glanced at the photos of his wife and son, and then looked over at the Cylon briefing sheets once more. After a few minutes, he closed his eyes again. He jerked awake. Maybe he was getting old. It used to be you could stay on alert on marathon watches with the best of them. He blinked and stretched his mouth and he yawned, shifted uncomfortably in the chair. Gradually, he closed his eyes once more and began to dream of a place more than a light year behind him, where the sun streamed down onto a beach on Caprica, where he and his wife, both younger then, had played with their 2-year-old son. That had been a happier time, perhaps the happiest of his life. That was before the stresses of parenthood and those of the military and diplomatic life had combined to take their toll. He loved his wife and his son, of course, but still, there were times in his dreams when the colonel started to wake again. What was that? He jerked up straight. The doors in front of them, at the Cylon end of the hall, were swinging open, splitting to reveal a blaze of light. Sweet lords of Kobol, it couldn't be. The sounds of footsteps were soft, but unmistakably metal on tile. Two huge chrome robots marched in through the open doors, then stepped to either side as guards. Cylon Centurions, modified but clearly recognizable. The colonel blinked, every sense of fire now. The robots raised their arms, which appeared to end with the barrels of built in weapons. Weapons folded back suddenly, revealing long, talon like fingers that flipped forward to form something like hands. The colonel stared at them, pulling momentarily at his collar before catching himself. The robots stood utterly impassive. Each had a single crimson eye that slid back and forth across an angular brow, scanning, scanning. Something else was coming. The colonel could hear the footsteps. Another robot, he assumed. The two standing guard did not move an inch. The colonel licked his lips nervously, waiting. A shadow moved in the light, a figure coming toward him, walking, emerging from the light. It was a blonde woman, dressed in a crimson jacket and skirt and elegant boots that came nearly to her knees. She was stunningly beautiful. She walked toward him with a precise, confident stride, one foot in front of the other. The closer she came, the more unnervingly beautiful she looked. She exuded sensuality. Her hair fell in loose waves and curls to her shoulders. Her figure was riveting, her eyes sharp and probing. He drew a hoarse breath, only half believing what he was seeing. But what he was thinking was, a hostage of some kind. They're releasing a hostage. But why? Why would they do that? Why now? The woman walked directly to the table and came around the end without a word. She leaned against the edge of the table directly in front of him. Can't get much more direct than that. She might as well have been in his lap. His heart began pounding. On her face was the hint of a smile, rather pensive. She cocked her head and listened, or perhaps she was waiting for the colonel to say something. She leaned forward, bringing her face close to his, and she spoke the first words the colonel had heard since leaving his ship. In a low, sultry voice, she asked, "Are you alive?" The words went through him like electricity. He stammered, trying to reply, and finally managed, "Yes." One hand on his shoulder now, she leaned closer still. He could feel her breath, warm and sweet on his face, so beautiful, so. Before he could complete this thought, she said, just a little more forcefully, "Prove it." And then, in exquisite torture of slow motion, she moved her hand to the back of his neck, drew him to her, and kissed him. Kissed him? But why? His mind went utterly blank, then returned with an awareness only of this moment. There was a power in this kiss, almost supernatural power, that made other thoughts and cares flee. Her lips were afire with passion. They worked to discover the shape of his lips. Her breath was hot on him now. Lust awakened from a deep slumber began to flare to life in him. He returned the kiss now, answering passion with passion. Her grip tightened on the back of his neck. All thought of his mission fled. All thought of his wife. In the deep, deep darkness surrounding the station and its docked spacecraft, another ship was moving. It was immense and shaped something like two sea stars joined face to face, kissing, their arms twisted at odd angles. It was, unmistakably, a Cylon-based star. Beside it, the colonial ship and the station looked like tiny plastic toys. It was now moving away from the station, gaining a little distance, but not too much, before a single white point of light streaked out from somewhere within it and began to turn in a graceful curve around the extensions of the base star's arms. Then the light whipped back inward toward the little space station, and as it struck the station, there was a blinding flash. The colonel felt the deck shudder beneath him as the kisses came more and more urgently. It was almost as though she were trying to draw something out of him, some passion no human had ever touched before. Something terrible was happening, of that he was certain, but his mind was too fogged by her raw, commanding sexuality to focus and comprehend. And not just her sexuality, but a feeling that she was touching him in some inexplicably deep way, drawing from him emotions he could never express. Another shudder shook the room harder than before, and he tried to break from her kiss. For a fraction of an instant, she smiled, a bit sadly, and sweetly, perhaps, and with a probing gaze, murmured, "It has begun." He struggled to pull free, but there was an inhuman strength in the hand pulling him back toward her lips. Her mouth met his again as the papers on the table began to flutter and fly away. As she breathed in his mouth, he felt all the air rushing from the chamber. If he did not break free and get to a safe place, he would die. A third and final shudder jarred his senses, but only for an instant, before he, the woman, and the entire space station exploded in a ball of fire and hull metal shrapnel. In the silence of deep space, there was no sound of the explosion. No human still living was close enough to see the flash of the fireball, and no warning signal was ever sent. Its single, simple mission concluded, Cylon ship quickly moved away, vanishing back into the darkness of the interstellar void. We'll get to chapter 2 in just a moment. I'm going to use the bathroom here. Um, I would like to also show a picture of this Armistice station because this is a TV show. So he's only describing things that you could also look up and see on your own. So if I can pull it here, that is kind of what it looks like. So he docks on the end part that's jutting out there, walks through that hallway, and goes into a little station. Here's the colonel, and here's the woman walking into the room, the angular room. Um, and here's that station being destroyed. And I believe I could show even one of the Cylon base stations uh, like that, almost like two sea stars jutting out at an odd angle. So there you go. You have a little bit of everything there. Yeah, we'll take a 2-minute break here, and then we will press on and move forward. Just a moment here. Chapter 2. On the warship Galactica. That is what the Battlestar Galactica is, a warship. Thump, thump. The rhythm of the running footsteps echoed in the spaceship's passageway, a high trapezoidal corridor lit by regularly spaced, vertical blue-white light tubes along the slanted support beams. The passageway was spotlessly clean, but well worn with use, and now, as always, full of people. Kara Thrace rounded a corner, jogged past a handful of crewmen coming the other way. Kara was an athletic, short-haired blonde woman in her late 20s and a fighter pilot. She bore down on a knot of tourists gathered in the passageway ahead. She was already breathing hard, but that didn't stop her from yelling, "Make a hole!" That produced some startled looks from the visitors and their guide. They hastily backed to either side of the corridor and made a hole. Kara plunged through their midst and never looked back, though she shuddered a little at the tour guide's voice, telling the people about the history of the Galactica, the sole remaining battle star from the era of the Cylon War. "Originally 12 battle stars," he said in perfect museum guide's tone of voice, "each representing one of Cobal's 12 colonies. Galactica represented Caprica." Kara thought as she left the tourists behind. "Wait until the ship is a museum, will ya?" Such thoughts were very much in Commander William Adama's mind as he walked the ship's corridors. He had a speech to give, and he still hadn't quite worked out what he wanted to say. The Galactica's stocky, craggy-faced commanding officer didn't much like giving speeches under any circumstances. Throughout his long years in the service, he managed to avoid that duty whenever possible, and he certainly didn't like to dwell on the reasons for this particular speech. Nevertheless, it had to be done, and there was no getting around the fact that as Galactica's final master, he was the one who had to do it. Glancing down at the paper in his hand as he walked, he tried once more in his deep, husky voice. Cylon War is long over. Let's not forget the reasons why." A voice from behind him interrupted. "Commander Adama, if I may." It was Captain Kelly, the landing signal officer. This was the third time he'd been interrupted before getting through the opening paragraph of his speech, but Adama didn't really mind. He glanced back as Kelly caught up with him. "Captain?" Kelly appeared to feel awkward now that he had his commander's ear. "Well, sir, I just want to say what a pleasure it's been serving with you under your command, sir." Kelly, touched, Adama turned to shake the officer's hand. "It's been my honor. Good luck in your next assignment." Kelly was only the latest of many members of the crew to approach him with such sentiments today. Adama felt touched by all of them. "Thank you, sir." For a moment, Kelly looked as if he might have something more to say, but finally he just nodded and turned down the side corridor. Adama kept walking, trying to remember the opening line of his speech without looking down. Murmuring, he began, "Cylon War is long over, yet we must not forget." Jogging footsteps behind him, coming alongside. "Morning, sir," called a familiar voice. "Morning, Starbuck," he answered, without looking up. "What do you hear?" "Nothing but the rain," answered Kara Thrace, keeping pace beside him. "Grab your gun and bring in the cat," Adama said, completing the ritual exchange he and Kara had shared for as long as she'd been a pilot on his ship. Kara grinned and pointed a finger at him. "Boom, boom, boom," she said, and accelerated ahead to finish her morning jog. Adama watched her with a smile as she disappeared around the bend. There went one of his top pilots, and one of the biggest hellraisers on his ship. Practically a daughter to him. He shook his head and went back to rehearsing his speech. This time he made it to the fourth sentence before he looked up to see a trio of enlisted crew members from the hangar deck, a woman and two men muttering to each other with some urgency. Adama just caught the words, "That yesterday," and some under-the-breath curses as specialists Socinus and Prasna passed something behind their backs, while trying to look innocent. "Too late," Adama said. "What's up?" He wasn't worried. Every commander should have such a reliable crew. 3 crew members saluted. Socinus made the quickest recovery. "Nothing, sir. Just another leak in that fracking window." The young man hesitated. "Pardon me, sir." Prasna, hand still behind his back, added, "This is supposed to be a battle star, not a museum. Sorry to say so, sir." "I couldn't agree more," Adama said. Be careful out there, all right? Letting them, keep their secret, he turned back toward his destination. As he neared the Combat Information Center, he tried one last time to rehearse his speech, but it was no use. Once he stepped into the CIC, there was no such thing as a private moment. CIC, located deep in the belly of the massive ship, was the Battlestar's nerve center. It was the center of both flight and combat operations. A huge, dimly lit room filled with consoles and overhead monitors, work counters, and not enough seats to go around. During normal operations, there could easily be 30 or 40 crew members moving about here. Today, there were maybe a dozen. You could feel the coming decommissioning hanging in the air. Made Adama sad, but also proud to be here at the end. Greeted by the officer of the watch, Lieutenant Gata, Adama kept walking, casting a casual but perceptive eye over the various workstations as Gata briefed him from the stack of papers in his hands, printouts of the day's communications traffic, um, on radios and such. This was the only Battlestar in the fleet that still kept everything on paper, and that was exactly the way Adama wanted it. Anything interesting? Adama asked, looking up to scan the overhead monitors. Gator was young, efficient, and usually a good judge of what Adama was likely to consider interesting. Adama was going to miss him. Mostly just housekeeping, Gator said, although there is one sort of odd message we were copied on. He handed Adama the printouts. It's the one from Fleet Headquarters. The courier officer is overdue coming back from Armistice Station, and they're asking for a status report on all FTL cable ships just in case they need somebody to jump out there today and see if this ship is having mechanical problems. Adama chuckled as he flipped through the printouts. I think we're a little busy today. Wouldn't you say so, Lieutenant? The watch officer grinned. Yes, sir. I'm glad we agree, Adama said wryly. He handed the stack of printouts back to Gata and prepared to walk on. Before he could take another step, though, Gata continued, May I take this opportunity to say what a pleasure and honor it's been to serve under you these past 3 years? He gestured awkwardly, pushing the edges of the paper pile together. It's my honor, Lieutenant Gata, Adama replied, saluting. Lords of Cobalt, well, is everyone on the ship going to say that to him today? Perhaps he had better get used to it. Turning, he glanced back at the piece of paper he'd been carrying for the last hour. To himself, he repeated softly, The Cylon War is long over. For Aaron Doral, the day had been a non-stop series of encounters with the news media and other VIPs newly arriving aboard Galactica, all of them here for the decommissioning ceremony scheduled for tomorrow. For today, his role was to explain and extol. His role was to interest the press and to lay the groundwork for the tour guides who would indeed be giving this spiel once the old crate was officially what it had been in reality for years now, a museum piece. But making the old seem fresh, the ugly beautiful, was what Aaron Doral was good at. Aaron Doral was 32, Natalie dressed in a blue civilian suit, and a fast talker. Aaron Doral was a public relations man. As he strode through the ship's passageways, leading a cohort of media reporters and others lucky enough to have wangled passes, he spoke energetically about what the ship had meant to the Cylons through the years, and why she was the way she was. Doral was a hard man to impress, but even if he felt twinges of pride in this ship that had served for nearly half a century, at one time the flagship of the fleet, now the oldest of all the Battlestars, also flying anachronism. Doral gestured as he led the latest group through the public portion of the ship. You'll see things here that might look odd, even antiques to our modern eyes, he said, turning to face the knot of people following him. You'll see phones with cords, all kinds of manual valves in the most awkward places, computers that barely deserve the name. After confirming that people were nodding in acknowledgement, he continued, It was all designed to operate against an enemy who could infiltrate and disrupt even the most basic computer systems. Galactica is a reminder of a time when we were so frightened of our enemies that we looked backward to our past for protection. Backward to simpler computers and away from the networking of the day, networking that, at the time, made us so terribly vulnerable to our Cylon threat. Of course, he paused to gesture toward the CIC, which they would not be walking through. Modern battle stars resemble Galactica in only the most superficial ways. Doral paused to say hello to an older gentleman with thinning gray hair. Colonel Ty, the ship's executive officer. But he only got a pained scowl in return as Ty stalked past. Good God, that man looked hungover. Luckily, he wasn't going to be serving on board much longer. One thing Doral knew was that he wasn't going to say anything about that to his audience. No, smile and show respect to that old fossil. That was the way to keep this audience pleased with their tour. Next, he said, looking back over his shoulder again, we're going to walk down the port side of the ship to get a view of the real meat and potatoes of Battlestar, the hangar deck where the real fighting force, the Vipers and Raptors are serviced and kept ready for action at a moment's notice. The hangar deck was precisely where Commander Adama was headed at this moment, having completed his round of the CIC. The crew chief had asked him to come down to see something special. Adama stepped down off the ladder onto the hangar deck to be greeted by Chief Petty Officer Galen Tyrrell. The chief was obviously working to keep a sober face as he called all hands on deck to attention. Adama saluted as quickly as and as quickly put the scattered crew members back at ease. Morning, Chief. How are you today? Tyrrell, a seasoned leader of the hangar maintenance crews and one of the most respected non-commissioned officers on the entire ship, wore an uncommon expression of eagerness and maybe a bit of nervousness. Thank you for coming down, sir. We've been looking forward to showing you this. Well, so have I, Chief. Whatever it is, Adama said. He kept a dry expression on his face, but his curiosity was definitely piqued. If you'll just follow me, sir. Tyrrell led him around an array of machinery and spacecraft with maintenance panels propped open. A small crowd of enlisted deckhands accredited him behind him as they proceeded. Tyrrell brought Adama to a craft covered from nose to tail with a black tarp. It was clearly a Viper, the lines of the space fighter unmistakable under the covering. What's this, Chief? A grin twitched at the corner of Tyrrell's mouth as he stood in front of the craft, waiting for the rest of the crew to crowd around. He seemed about to speak, then simply gestured to several of the deckhands who hurried forward and swept the tarp smoothly off the concealed craft. Adama stared. It was an old-style Viper, a fighter from the days of the original Cylon War. Mark II, he said, in genuine wonder. Haven't seen one of these in about 20 years. If the commander will take a closer look. Adama shot Tyrrell a puzzled glance and stepped closer, and then he saw it. The name, stenciled on the hull, just below the lip of the cockpit canopy. Lieutenant William Adama. Husker. He laughed. So that's what they'd been up to, painting his name and his old call sign on the vintage warbird. Tyrrell was still talking. At the tail number, Nebula 7242 Constellation. Adama's mouth dropped open as he read the registration markings on the Viper's tail. N7242C. They hadn't just painted his name on any old warbird. Oh my God. Where did you find him? Tyrrell was openly grinning now. Rusting out in a salvage yard over Terran. We had hopes the commander would allow her to participate in the decommissioning ceremony. Adama turned in disbelief. She'll fly? Oh, yes, sir. We've restored the engines, patched the guidance system, replaced much of the flight controls. Adama hardly knew whether to laugh or cry. You guys are amazing. He reached out to touch the hull of the craft. Viper N7242C. How many times had he flown this fighter 40 years ago? How many times had it survived Cylon attack to bring him safely to the flight deck? God, he thought. She's fuel armed and ready for launch, sir. Laughing quietly, Adama ran his hands over the aft engine cowling. Commander. Oh, sorry. Commander. He turned back. What? More? Tyrrell handed him a flat package wrapped in brown paper. Adama chuckled. Somebody's bucking for a promotion around here. Tyrrell grinned and glanced at the deck crewman standing beside him. I believe that would be Prosman, sir. He found this in the fleet archives. He was doing some research for the museum. Prosna lifted his chin slightly, but did not crack a smile. It felt like a plaque of some kind. Adama tore the paper open and lifted out a picture framed in dark, heavy hardwood, square with all four corners cut off. It was a photo of himself as a young fighter pilot, standing in front of this same Viper with two boys. Sweet lords of Cobol. Zack and Lee must have been about 7 or 8 at the time. They were beaming with pride as they stood with their father and his Viper. Adama felt his mask of command begin to fail as a host of unexpected emotions welled up in him. They looked so happy. A lump formed in his throat as he fought to keep his composure, to hold back the tears that were welling in his eyes. Thank you, he said, looking up before he could crack, looking all around him to include the entire assembled crew. Thank you all. You're welcome, sir, said Tyrrell, and as Adama stood, continuing to stare silently at the photo in his hands, Tyrrell quietly dismissed the crew. Adama stood motionless, lost in the past, lost in the photo for a very long time. So that was our good introduction to the inside of the Battlestar. I could probably find some photos of the inside. Um, if I can, I don't exactly know. Oh, here's a nice one. Here's a picture of Commander Adama talking, trying to figure out his speech, and there's Terra Thrace beside him. It's a really good um, image of the two there. I think I don't really have too much else to say. Um, maybe if I could, if I had the name of the Viper again, I could probably show it. What is that serial number? There it is. Here's him in the flight deck, looking at the Viper. That's what a Viper one looks like there. And he receives that photo of him and his sons, and he gets very emotional by it, which we don't really know why at this moment. But yeah, interesting. Yeah. So that's chapter 2. We'll move on to chapter 3 in just a moment. Yeah, Keith, this is Battlestar. This is really fun. Um, yeah, Space Mormons. That's a way of putting it. And yeah, we'll continue on this in just a sec. So I just opened the tab again, briefly looked at it elsewhere. I feel like reading the first 5 chapters here would be good. I think that takes us to the first commercial break of the original miniseries. I think that would be a good place to pause it here. This is introducing a lot of characters. I do like the way he does it. It's a lot of sci-fi jargon. I've never read this before. I do think the show exhibits and demonstrates these things very well. Like the things that he's saying, like this place is worn with use. It's one of the first battle stars to not have networked control. Just to show the lengths that they had to go to fight such a powerful threat. Um, And then I like that he shifts perspectives throughout the chapter in order to bring you into different people's heads. Very Game of Thrones esque in that regard. Um, yeah, he's a pretty solid writer. I think sometimes he's a tad repetitious, but and I also think that these chapters could be a tad longer with like a little more detail to them. Um, like I mean, we got like brief descriptions of the characters. We know who William Adama is now, Kara Thrace, so really can't complain too much. I mean, how much more are you supposed to do besides just go watch the show? But nonetheless, this is still a very solid adaptation. I'm interested to see some of the scenes that he'll rewrite, like this one. I don't know how he's about to demonstrate the scene because I remember this miniseries pretty well. Um, I don't know if which character's perspective he's going to take us into. Okay, chapter 3. Let's get into Galactica again. We're still on the ship. Officer's wardroom. This is all preface, this is all set up for what's about to happen. The Triad game was already well underway when Colonel Saul Ty entered the officer's wardroom and headed shakily for the coffee table. He helped himself to a coffee cup, but did not fill it with coffee. From his pocket, he produced a small metal flask. He unscrewed the top and carefully poured a generous shot of whiskey into the coffee cup. If anyone noticed, nobody said anything. Colonel Ty, the executive officer of the ship, was off duty. If he wanted to have a drink or two, there's nobody here who could tell him no. It sure helped steady his nerves and take the edge off that headache that pounded insistently at the back of the skull. Besides, maybe it would help him shake things up a little here. These people were having too damn much fun. I pulled out the last remaining chair at the card table and sat down across the table from Lieutenant Kara Thrace. Starbuck, to the flight group. Uh-oh, she muttered without looking up. Whether she was talking about his arrival or the card she was holding, he couldn't tell for sure. He'd find out. An opportunity to taunt Kara Thrace was something he could never resist. "Ah, man," said Ty, and waited while Thrace dealt him a hand of cards. Here we go. That was from Hilo, on his immediate left. Hilo was the flight officer for the Raptor pilot sitting to his immediate left. Sharon Valeri, better known as Boomer. Lieutenant Thrace's short blonde hair came just over her ears and eyebrows. She cultivated a tough guy look and was cockily smoking a cigar. She aimed it at Hilo and said, "Gonna play with the big dogs?" She pointed to the table. Hilo dropped his chips onto the pile. "No fair," complained Boomer, squinting at her cards. Not such a good hand, maybe. Colonel Ty tuned out the banner while he examined his cards. Finally, he looked up, as Thrace said with a laugh, "Oh, Hilo, when are you gonna learn? First you're fine with crooks, and then..." Ow! Boomer just smacked her arm. "Then you're betting against Starbuck?" I let out a snort. "Starbuck? There's the call sign. Starbuck?" He gave a string of chicken sounds. "Muck, muck, 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 muck. Why did he get that name anyway? Was that before you were thrown in the brig as a cadet for drunk and disorderly, or after?" He glanced over his cards, not meeting Thrace's eyes. Unperturbed, Thrace leaned back and blew a stream of smoke from her cigar. "After," she said smugly. "After," he echoed, searching for a snappy comeback, but not finding one. "That's right, it was. After." "I'm in." Hilo tossed in some more chips. "Bets to you, XO." Brought back to the game by the sound of the chips, Ty muttered, "I'm in," and followed Hilo's chips with a few of his own. Lieutenant Thrace had never dropped her gaze from him. "How's the wife?" she asked in slow, measured tones. He stiffened, words lodging in his throat. No wonder he hated her. Anger and the whiskey made his skin burn, but he was damned if he was going to rise to the bait. Around him, the other players continued their banter, oblivious to the power struggle that had just begun. Barely heard them. "Pyramid game on Geminon." Arrogant bitch. Yeah, his wife probably was banging some other man right now, wherever she was. "What were you doing on?" He hadn't spoken to her in the last month and had no reason to think he'd speak to her in the next. "Girl there I know." "What girl don't you?" The Whacker's just fine, I said evenly. Lieutenant Thrace grinned and sipped from her mug. Talk to her, Leoline? Ty knitted his eyebrow and scowled at his cards, pretending he hadn't heard. He raised his coffee cup to his lips, with an effort mastering the slight trembling in his hand. The whiskey burned as he swallowed. Lieutenant Thrace had turned back to the game. All right, 30 for me. She threw in more chips. It looks like I'll have to bring this lovely little game to a close because she slapped her cards down onto the table. Full colors! Grinning like a kid with candy, she began raking the pile of chips toward her. Ty felt the fury rising in his chest. Grace was doing a little dance in her seat now, singing and crowing, and there were no words to express his disgust at her smug superiority. No words, but with a roar, he stood up and shoved the table over onto her. Chips and cards flew across the room. Grace looked startled for an instant and then lunged. Her fist landed on his chin before he could react, and he fell backwards over his chair, crashing to the floor. Stunned and more than a little dizzy, he fought his way back to his feet, fighting off the helping hands of nearby crewmen. Grace had been pulled back by Boomer and Hilo, but she was struggling to break free. I'm fine, she snapped. After a moment, they let her go. She pushed her chair calmly back out of her face, then lunged for him again. Hilo grabbed her and this time pushed her well clear of Ty. The colonel gathered himself, summoning all of his faculties to speak clearly through the alcohol haze. At last he had her where he wanted her. He pointed a finger at Thrace, deliberate, calm, tightly wrapped around the steel anger in his voice, controlling the quaver that threatened to betray his real condition. You have finally gone too far. Now you're done. She sneered. Lieutenant, consider yourself under arrest, pending charges. Report to the brig. Thrace never dropped a sneer. She did give him the satisfaction of looking surprised. She bent down, picked up her fallen cigar, obviously making a deliberate effort to look unperturbed. She glanced around the room with a slight smile. Gentlemen, she said, and jammed the cigar between her teeth, turned and swaggered from the room. I watched with scarcely contained fury. This time he had her, and this time he would break her for good. The photographers would be arriving soon, and Commander Adama had to get ready. He pulled a clean dress jacket out of his closet. Are you really gonna press charges against Kara? He asked, turning to look at Colonel Ty. Ty was sunk into an easy chair in Adama's stateroom. He looked anything but at ease. For striking a superior officer? You're damn right I am. Ty pushed himself up and walked across the room to Adama's desk. Adama grunted and refrained from saying a few words that came to mind. I heard you started the day early. Started the day off pretty early. He was increasingly worried about Ty's drinking problem. If they weren't both so close to retirement, he would be forced to do something about it. Saul had always been a drinker, but until the last few months, he had managed to not let it get in the way of his duties. Of course, until the last few months, his wife Ellen had been a lot more discreet about her infidelities. Ty picked up the framed photo that Adama had received from the hangar crew earlier in the day. I wasn't on duty, said with quiet defensiveness. He studied the picture as he carried it back to the easy chair. Now, where did you get this? He asked in amazement. Jules' deck gang scrounged it up. Adama still found it hard to believe. He sat on the edge of his bunk and began taking off his boots. I couldn't talk you out of it, could I? Ty gave one of those silent snorts that Adama could have heard in the next room. Not a chance. She's insubordinate, undisciplined. Adama interrupted. She's probably one of the best fighter pilots I've ever seen in my life. She's better than I am. Well, twice as good as you. Like hell, Ty growled. He tapped the photo. How long ago was this? Adama shrugged and wiped his face and neck with a towel. Must have been about 20, 25 years ago. I don't know. Put the towel down. Listen, I'm not about to defend what you did, especially the crack about your marital problems, but you did kick over the table first. I did not. Ty stopped suddenly and paused and thought, unless I did. Adama just looked at his old friend for a moment, thinking of the long years they'd been together, of all the bar fights, all the Cylon fights, all the battles with military bureaucracy. Ty had always been the one with the incendiary temper, and Adama the one to intervene with a cooler head. You did. What do you say you drop the formal charges and just let her cool her heels in the brig until we're all. Ty sat silent for a beat or two, and then, by way of conceding, said, "You always did have a soft spot for her. Damned if I can see why." "Yeah, guess I'm just a crazy old man," Dama said with a soft smile. "Yeah," said Ty. Beneath the gruffness of his words, Adama knew was the unspoken trust between men who had been together through war and peace, honor and shame. "You sure as hell are, just like me. No wonder they're about to put us both out to pasture." Dama laughed. "Couple of old war horses, eh?" I grunted. "More like a couple of old mules, if you ask me." Chapter 4. Um, Let me see here if I can grab the card game, photo of the card game being played in that shot. If there's a way to see that. Be kind of hard to find just because, like, we're talking about like certain shots in the show. I will say, I think this shot is pretty solid. Um, this gives a good shot of the game that's being played, the bottom of the picture, the room they're in. You can see the animosity there on Kara's face, looking at the colonel, whose bald head is there. You can see the back of his ear on the right side of the frame, and she's just staring at him angrily. Um, so yeah, there's that there. All right, another couple seconds. We'll get into chapter 4. Yeah, Keith, they did make this into a book. This is the only one that they did novelize. I kind of wish they novelized the rest of the show, um, but of course that would be a tall task, very tall task. Even if you did, I don't know, like what, 4 episodes per book, you'd still have like a, I don't know, 15 or 16 book series tops. Um, so yeah, that would be pretty dense. And they'd all probably be pretty thick, like 400 pages or so. But whatever. Anyways, couple minutes. So, in case anyone wasn't aware, I was trying to. Well, it's not that you're not aware. It's probably pretty obvious. I'm trying to emulate their voices. I really can't do it too much with the Chief Tyrrell from chapter 2. He's a very important character, but I can't really get his voice down, so I just made him I made him Southern, I guess. Um, I think I got Ty's voice down sort of. Adama's a little tough because I don't have the gruff, coarseness of his of Edward James Olmos's voice. No one can really do it like any of them, really, but Ty is my favorite. I can only do so many female voices, so I'll try my best, but we'll see what happens. Okay, chapter 4. This is on Caprica Medical Center, Caprica City. So now we're going to get into one of the 12 planets, one of the 12 colonies. This is on Caprica. in the main city on the planet, Caprica City. Caprica City, capital of the Caprica colony, largest city on the planet Caprica, was a modern metropolis. Traffic flowed nonstop through the air, along the ground, under the ground, and on the water offshore. Its skyscrapers and towers jutted into a blue sky. It was the epitome of hope, prosperity, and human achievement. The sight of the skyline was enough to make the heart soar. All of this was visible right outside the window of the waiting room. Sitting silently in a leather armchair facing an unoccupied desk was an attractive 48-year-old woman named Laura Roslin. She had a soft featured oval face and dark, shoulder length hair. She wore a conservatively cut dress of a light periwinkle blue. Her gaze, deep and intelligent, was frightened. Though her eyes were apparently focused outside the long bay window, Laura Roslin saw none of the majesty of the great city. All she saw were the pale yellow saffron blossoms just outside the glass. So lovely, so fragile. Her thoughts were in turmoil. When is he going to bring me those results? As if in response to her thoughts, the door behind her closed with a reverberating thud. She closed her eyes and listened to the doctor's footsteps as he crossed the long room toward the desk where Laura sat. Who in the world got the idea that a doctor's office should be in a room the size of a small gymnasium? Could it possibly be more impersonal? The doctor came around the desk, glanced into the file folder in his hand, then closed it before speaking. His expression was sober, and she already knew what he was going to say. I'm afraid the tests are positive, he said quietly. The mass is malignant. We'll do all we can, of course, but I have to be honest. It's advanced well beyond the point that we can have much hope. White noise filled Laura's mind as she looked at him, nodded, looked away, tried to hurl her thoughts as far away as humanly possible. Get away from here. I'll contact the specialists at the Caprica Institute. She couldn't stand to listen anymore. Laura forced herself up out of the chair, forced a pained smile. Thank you, doctor. If you'll excuse me, I have a flight to catch. Dr. Roslin, just please call me as soon as possible. Any further delay will just. She barely heard him as she hurried across that long floor toward the exit. Colonial Transport 798. Buckled in, waiting, thinking, waiting, staring out the window at the sunlight burning on the launch tarmac. She really had a flight to catch, off planet to meet a warship. If only she could fly away from reality. Dear gods, why? Why me? Why cancer? There was movement beside her, and she looked up to see a slender young man dressed in a jacket and tie, with a large briefcase, standing nervously in the aisle beside her. She tried to smile, but didn't feel as if she'd succeeded. Yes? Secretary Roslin? He paused. I'm Billy Kaya. Another pause. Your new assistant. Ah, that took a moment to process. Yes, the human resources people had promised her a new assistant in time for the trip. She hadn't thought she'd be meeting him for the first time on the transport, though. Well, then, hello. Have a seat. She rose to let him pass to the window seat and extended a hand. He shook hands and sat down in one slightly awkward motion. He was a good-looking boy with curly brown hair and an alert demeanor, but he couldn't be a day over 20, and he was probably overwhelmed to be making a trip like this on his first day on the job. As Laura settled herself back in her seat, Billy bent forward and extracted a thick three-ring binder from his briefcase. So Sandra at the Education Ministry main office sent me this briefing book to give you. Thank you, she whispered, resting it in her lap without looking at it. She looked back out the window, past Billy, eyes blurry. She was barely aware of the captain asking all passengers and flight attendants to fasten their seatbelts. We are preparing for departure to Galactica with an expected flight time of 5.5 hours. As the transport lifted from the launch pad and roared skyward, she rested her head against the cushioned seat back and shut her eyes tight. Uh, Dr. Roslin? She blinked, realized they'd been walking, and she hadn't heard a word he'd said. What? Oh, I'm sorry. What were you saying? Billy looked a little puzzled at her lack of attention, but he said nothing about it. Instead, he continued, I also sent the president a copy of your speech for Galactica's retirement. Hopefully, he'll have a chance to review it. But there is a 30-minute time delay between Galactica and. Excuse me, Laura said abruptly. She jumped up from her seat and hurried up the aisle, leaving a startled Billy behind her. Too much, too much. She ran into the lavatory and shut the door behind her. In privacy at last, she leaned back against the door and breathed, just breathed and stared up into nothing. Fear and despair rose in her like poison in her bloodstream, threatening to choke her. She gasped, fought for air, each breath feeling as if it would be her last. She desperately wanted to cry, to flood the room with tears of grief and anger, but just as urgently she fought against it, fought against giving this thing even that much of a victory. How dare you invade my body? How dare you? With a muffled gasp of anguish, she pulled open the front of her jacket and exposed the white blouse that crisscrossed over her breasts. She thrust her right hand under her jacket, covering her left breast, covering the lump that was growing, the traitor's part of her that was devouring her body, devouring her life. Damn, 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 damn. She is going to play, of course, a very critical role as well. Um, I'm pretty sure I could find a photo of her. Here is the spot she's in. Here's the doctor's office, the impersonal doctor's office that shows the majesty of the city, but also um, she can't really focus on any of the beauty there because she's getting the news of her life. Um, they also show just a photo of her. Here she is. This is the lady. She's in Donnie Darko as well. Mary McDonald. See up here above the Wikipedia photo. There's her in, I think, in the bathroom, uh, getting ready to feel the lump in her breast. So yeah, um, excellent, excellent, excellent character. It's one of my friend's favorite characters in the story as well. I like her as well. She has this very beautiful character arc. Not my favorite character, but she's really up there. Anyways, we'll take just again 2 more minutes, and this will be the last chapter that we read in this video. Okay, chapter 5 here. This is also still in Caprica City. Let's go to a different spot of it, the Riverwalk Market. Clear, breezy day, bright sunshine and a blue sky, crowds of people milled about in the outdoor marketplace, enjoying the warmth of the perfect spring afternoon. One person felt differently about this, however, though he wouldn't have known from the way she looked around the crowd, tossing her shoulder-length, bleach blonde hair with the movement of her head, or the look of the bright hazel eyes taking in everything around her. Most beautiful, male or female, would have called her, or most people, male or female, would have called her stunningly beautiful. She wouldn't have disagreed, but she might have called it part of her job description. Form follows function. She walked casually and with no particular destination for the moment, but with a curious air of purpose, as though she did not yet know what she was here to do. But she knew that it would be revealed to her when the time came. That time, she had a feeling, would be soon. She brushed her fingertips along the blossoms of a lilacan bush and gazed over the reflecting pool that formed a lovely interruption in the lines of the marketplace. Something lay ahead for her. She sensed it. Her gaze wandered over the pedestrians moving about and fell on a very small child in a stroller. How darling. She felt drawn to it immediately. She stepped closer and gazed down on the helpless thing. The sight stirred something in her heart. It must have showed on her face because the child's mother, standing just a few feet away, noticed and stepped closer with a tentative smile, taking the handle of the stroller instinctively, protectively. How small they are, murmured the blonde woman, more to herself than to the mother. I know, they grow up so fast, the mother replied, casting her own loving gaze down on her child. The two shared a beaming moment together. The woman gestured. May I? There was a moment hesitation, and then the mother said, Sure. It was the kind of sure that guaranteed that the mother would be watching every move the woman made, as she should. The blonde woman might have been unmarried herself, but she absolutely approved of protective parenting, even if, in the end, parents had to die to make room for the children. The mother scooped her child gently out of the stroller, cradling it for a moment before carefully placing it in the arms of the blonde woman. Such a small bundle. So light. The baby gave a plaintive squeak. She calmed it with a light touch, stroking its cheek. So fragile. Shh. She soothed it again. You're not going to have to cry much longer, she whispered. The mother, nervous again, reached out. We really should be going. Nearby, a man was looking over the heads of the intervening people, trying to wave her over. Father, no doubt. The woman smiled as she passed the child back to its mother, who cradled it reassuringly, and then returned it to the stroller. The woman leaned forward to take one more look. It's amazing how the neck can support that much weight, she said, marveling. Yes, the mother started to say, but it was interrupted by her husband calling, Centura, honey. She looked away to catch her husband's eye and wave. Come on. Okay, called the mother. Give me a moment. The interruption was quite enough time for the blonde woman to reach down one last time into the stroller, to slip her hand beneath the baby's neck, and to make one quick, silent movement. You won't have to suffer any longer. She straightened and smiled sweetly, sadly at the infant. Then, not meeting the mother's suddenly worried expression, she turned and quickly walked away. She could feel the tension behind her, the inexplicable fear as she put distance between herself and the mother and child. No more suffering. Not for you. As the mother's scream of horror rent the afternoon peace, the blonde woman did not look back. Her brow was furrowed, though, and her heart was filled with a mixture of sadness and regret, but above all, a certainty of the rightness of what she had just done. I have spared you, little child. Hmm. So why is that? That is very, very interesting. Why did that happen? If you are watching the show, you would know from the description, or sorry, from the visuals, that this woman, this woman that just killed this baby here, is the same woman that kissed the man on the armistice station. Um, Let me see if I can find a photo of it. Um, let's see. Here she is holding the baby in her hand. The show's not TVMA or anything super violent, by the way, even though this is a very tough moment. Um, Here she is holding the child. Um, and we'll deal with why she just chose to kill this baby in the next one. Um, we will also discover what her agenda is and why is she alive when we just read in the prologue, or sorry, in chapter one, that she gets killed at the armistice station. Clearly, something larger is at play here. That is going to be it for me. I hope y'all had some fun here. That was very entertaining for me. I just love this story. Um, Thank you, sir. I much appreciate it. It was a very fun stream to make. I love reading this type of stuff. Um, on my own time, of course. But I wanted to share this one because it was free. I don't think I'll get copyright strike for it. I'm not claiming to own Battlestar, that's for damn sure. And I hope that in the future, the spiritual reality of what's going on in the story will be made apparent. These first 5 chapters for sure are just set up, and I'm sure the next like 5 or 6 chapters will also set up the massive story of the show, which is beautiful. Okay, that's gonna be it for me. Grace and peace to you all. I will, like I said, I'll have timestamps up either at the time of this. Of course, they're not literally there, but I'll have them up soon. So, grace and peace to you all.